Certainly, Mr. Chair. Item number 1, Bureau Sanitation Report in response to motion Bond and Fuentes relative to the September 23rd, 2015 spill of materials of sewage origin in Santa Monica Bay. You have staff from the Bureau of Sanitation.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Chair Fuentes and Councilmember Blumenfeld, Tracy Menamidi, Bureau of Sanitation, Chief Operating Officer. We are here this afternoon to respond to the motion that was introduced by Councilman Bonin and seconded by yourself, Councilman Fuentes, in regard to debris that was deposited on the beaches as a result of activity at Hyperion Water Reclamation Plant. Just to start out with a little bit of background, Hyperion discharges 280 million gallons a day of treated water through our 5-mile outfall. This outfall has been in operation for over 50 years and is utilized for the discharge of our treated water on a 24/7 basis. So it has been in operation continuously since that time. As you can tell, this is a very critical piece of infrastructure for our treatment plant, and the consequences of failure could be catastrophic in terms of the public health perspective, as well as the environmental impact perspective, and our legal responsibilities and liability. An inspection that was done a few years ago revealed that some work needed to be done in terms of refurbishment and replacement of a portion of this outfall, as well as the related pump system. We understood at that point that this was a very serious undertaking, that it would require diversion into our 1-mile outfall because the actual improvements needed to take place on the 5-mile. As part of this, it did require pre-approval through the Regional Water Quality Control Board, as well as the U.S. EPA. We held numerous meetings, submitted documents, had a workshop with the regional board members themselves, and were successful in receiving that approval. Aside from the design and construction, sanitation spent over 1.5 years planning for this event. We worked very diligently in trying to anticipate any possible scenarios where things might go wrong, and had plans in place to address each of these scenarios. So, needless to say, we were quite surprised to discover through notification by Councilman Bonin himself that material of sewage origin, we call it MOSO, in this case it was primarily plastic casings from feminine hygiene products. We were very surprised to hear reports that this material was being seen on the local beaches. I do want to start first by saying that this debris is not something that you find in our treated water. Absolutely not in our treated water. And our conclusion, as will be explained in detail by our Hyperion plant manager, Tim DeVeda, is that the source of this material was actually debris from a 2005 raw sewage spill that had remained dormant within Hyperion's in-plant storm drain system and was subsequently flushed out with this recent diversion through our 1-mile outfall. We do want to assure the committee that this issue was addressed with the utmost of urgency and the very highest priority. All hands were on deck as soon as we received notice that this material was actually found on the beaches. We immediately responded with beach cleanup efforts. We embarked upon extensive investigation as to the source of the material and took additional response measures as well as preventive measures to make sure this wouldn't happen again in the future. We also assembled an expert advisory panel who has been working with us on the further review of the situation. We have a workshop that we will be having to provide a report back on their findings, conclusions, and further recommendations. So at this point, I'd like to turn the floor over to Tim. As I mentioned, our plant manager. We have a brief PowerPoint presentation where he will go into more of the details in explaining our research into how this happened and explaining the corrective measures that we've taken.
Okay. Good afternoon. If you don't mind, I'm going to stand up and then use the microphone. Thank you. So basically, this PowerPoint is going to address all the issues that were raised in the motion. So we're going to go give you a background, the immediate response measures we took, the extensive investigation that we performed, and the proactive measures that we've taken since then to make sure this never happens, the public education and outreach that we're going to embark on, and then the response to future incidents. In terms of Hyperion, we basically designed to treat a maximum flow of 850 million gallons per day. That's the peak during wet weather. So if you can imagine, that's a little, probably close to 9 colosseums full of water. That's what we are designed to treat. And so, but on the average, we are designed for 450 million gallons per day. And that's, again, like 5 colosseums. And that flow, generally, I know there's been concern in terms of how we're going to perform when El Nino comes. That flow is consistent with the kind of flows that we see during El Nino weather, and so we're quite confident that we're going to be able to handle the flows when that happens. The way the plan is designed is, once we get to that 850 million gallons per day, any kind of excess stormwater, because we have a large site, 144 acres, so any kind of stormwater over the plant site, the first flush is captured and sent through the treatment process. But then any excess water that comes as a result of the rainfall goes out through the 1 mile outfall. So, and we'll go through the explanations. So in terms of our treatment process, I am going to concentrate on the issue at hand, which is the material of sewage origin, how we handle it, and why we were quite confident that this did not come through our treatment process. So in terms of the, in terms of the treatment process itself, in the headworks, in the plant, we have a 3/4 inch bar screen. So everything coming into the plant from the collection system comes through this bar screen in the headworks. So this is the first line of defense, as we call it, where we take a lot of the materials, the solid materials that come into the plant. After that, the material goes through our primary tanks, which are basically long rectangular tanks where we slow down the flow and have all the solids settled down here, and then we skim up all the flow tables similar to the materials that showed up on the beach. So we skim them out and send them to our solid processing part of the plant. So whatever flow continues goes to our secondary processes where we have our biological matter feed on the wastewater and cleans it up. Once that water is clean, it comes to our final settling tanks. So here, these are tanks where we, again, settle the water and all the solids drops to the bottom, and then we skim all the flow tables on top. So this is essentially the process by which we remove all these materials, and that's why we're confident that the process works. So once it comes out from the final clarifiers on a normal situation, we send a portion of the flow to West Basin Water Reclamation Plant in El Segundo, where basically they do advanced water recycling. The remaining portion of the water flows out through the 5 mile and goes out from the plant. The 1 mile outfall, which is the outfall in question here, was basically serves as a backup and an emergency for emergencies. So the project itself, like Tracy mentioned, this was a project that we spent a great deal of time planning, and I'm just going to go quickly on what the project entailed. So in essence, this infrastructure that has been in place since the 1960s, and so we needed to replace this infrastructure at the effluent pumping plant. So the green portion of this piping just are the items that were new and we replaced. The old, the kind of reddish portion or brownish portion is we basically rehabilitated. So that's the essence of this project, to ensure that this piping system, that this pumping and piping infrastructure that we use to discharge out the 5 mile outfall will be there for 50 years or more. So then how did we get into this situation? On the 15th, we had rain. And during the rainstorm, as part of that effluent pumping plant, this is inside the pumping plant. So this was the pumps that we were replacing and fixing. So on the 15th, what happened was you have 5 discharge points that come out from 5 pumps. So once the rains came, the pumps kicked on automatically once we got to close to 400 million gallons. So once the pumps kicked on, towards the end here, this valve failed because the contractor was working, and we had planned to replace the valve as part of this project. So once that valve failed, water began to come back into the effluent pumping plant. So as the pumps kicked on, the water was being pumped back into the... So we began flooding the effluent pumping plant, and so we had to shut down the pumps. So once we shut down the pumps, we could not handle all that rainwater out the 5 Mile outfall because now we're going by gravity. And gravity can only get us to about 400 million gallons per day. So the remaining excess flow was what we discharged out the 1 Mile outfall. So for those of us that were there on that day, we saw this water, and so we knew it was clean water. And so that's why all the events that happened later came as a surprise to us. So I'm just going to go briefly through the chronology. So on the 21st, the project that Tracy mentioned, we had gotten all the approval. So on the 15th, we had the emergency discharge. On the 21st, we had a planned use of the 1 Mile outfall to perform the project that we needed to, and we had a 6-week duration to perform on the project. So on the night of the 21st, we got the notification from council member Bonning. So right away on the 23rd, we sent our folks out on the beach, and we began cleaning up right away. So we worked cooperatively with the LA County Department of Beaches and Harbor and did extensive cleaning of the beach. So on that same day, on the 23rd, the beaches were closed. So we worked as part of a task force with the LA County Department of Public Health, Beaches and Harbor ourselves, and we went through the data as all the cleanups happened. And so the beaches at El Segundo were reopened on the 25th and Dockweiler on the 26th. And on November 1st, we completed the major aspects of this project. So in terms of cleanup, this is a summary of what we've done. So as you see on the right-hand side, basically this is the equipment that's used by Department of Beaches and Harbor. So they clean on the sand portion, and we concentrate basically on the tidal zone. And so in the tidal zone, this information I have before you is we cleaned 4 miles of beach every day since September 23rd, usually 1 to 2 times a day. And to date, we've removed about 35.7 pounds of those materials of sewage origin. And in the process, as we taking the materials of sewage origin away, any kind of trash we see on the beach, we clean. Whatever we felt did not belong there, we clean in the process. So this is a summary of the materials of sewage origin, the total that we have cleaned so far to date. So over 5,000 for the casings, over 200 for the syringes, 120 for the lancets, and over 7,000 pounds of trash. And in the process, this last column shows the daily highs that we saw out there, and then the daily lows. So generally, as of this moment, most of the material we're basically bordering on the lower spectrum, where it's pretty much zero, but then it fluctuates a little bit, but it's pretty much at that low end. So the issue has basically been taken care of. So in the process, we took some immediate responses, because there are 2 primary ways in which we felt these materials of sewage origin could possibly exit our plant. One is through the treatment process, and I've described that we have a very efficient process of getting it out. The other is through the storm drain. So immediately what we did, at the direction of our director, was we installed screens on the effluent channel to ensure a 4th line of defense, to make sure that nothing gets through the treatment process. So this is an additional action that we took. We also installed a net at the end of the 1 Mile outfall, 50 foot in ocean water. We secured the maintenance hole from which we had a spill in 2005. We inspected and cleaned all the storm drains, and then we dedicated extra resources to do manual skimming of the plant clarifiers. So this is just a picture that shows the new screen that we put in place. So all the water that comes, treated water that comes out of the plant, must go through the screens now. And that's basically the picture of staff member cleaning the final clarifiers, and these are the other actions that we've taken. In terms of the MOSO investigation, we looked at the 2 basic pathways, the wastewater treatment system and the storm drain system. So in a wastewater treatment system, we examined it, and we're quite confident the process works, and the MOSO did not come from there. We contacted our sister agency, West Basin, that gets the water from us and got the water from us on the 15th. And basically they had no muscle. So that again reinforced the fact that we knew it did not come through our treatment process. So that left us beginning to examine all the storm drains that drain into the 1 mile outfall. So this is a picture of the various storm drains that drain into the 1 mile outfall. So we have the north side of the plant, which is kind of the dirtiest portion of the plant. So we collect all the storm water from that north side, pump it through these pumps, and treat it within the plant. On the central portion, so as you go further south, the plant gets cleaner. So on the central portion, we have pumps here that pumps the first flush, where anything over 10,000 gallons overflows and goes into the 1 mile. And on the south portion, which is the cleanest, same situation. But then we also have storm drains on Vista Del Mar and the beach parking lot that drain directly into our outfall. So we examine all those. So in the process of examining all those, we came to the conclusion that the north in-plant storm drain was the source of the mussel. And we reached that conclusion by sending a camera down into the storm drain, looking at it, and the fact that we found debris in there that was consistent with what was on the beach. So that's how we concluded that this was the source of the mussel. So back to the 2005 incident, how did that happen? Because mussel shouldn't be in the storm drain. So how did it get into the storm drain? So this is basically a schematic to try to explain what happened. So back in 2005, we have two sewers running parallel to each other, the CIS and the NOS. So we have a valve structure here, a diversion structure where you can reroute flow. This diversion structure failed in 2005. And so what happened was the flow from the CIS got into the NOS and inundated this pump station that no longer exists. And from the pump station, the wastewater, the raw sewage, got into an air pipe that's supposed to take foul odors from the sewers for treatment, got through that air pipe, came into the plant, came out from these two maintenance holes within the plant, and overflowed into the storm drain system. From this storm drain system overflow, that's how it got basically into the 1 mile outfall. So this picture from back in 2005 when the plant was dealing with the situation at hand. So we estimated, even though this took more than a day, we estimated about 160,000 gallons of raw sewage was what overflowed into the 1 mile outfall. The rest was captured in plant and treated. So what measures have we taken since then to make sure that this doesn't happen? One, for sure, we've completed the project that we had to do to ensure that our effluent pumping system works and is going to be reliable for a long period of time. We've installed screens. We've installed screens now on the outlet of the storm drain channel to make sure that anything that gets into the storm drain channel has to go through a screen before it gets out of the plant. So that's another extra line of defense that we've put in place. We've inspected and cleaned all the storm drain lines tributary to the 1 mile outfall, and now we've installed level transmitters so that whenever we have an overflow, we know there's an overflow actually occurring, and we can pay attention to that. Other things that we're doing right now, we're conducting weekly tests on all the pumps, storm drain pumps, because we know El Nino is coming, to make sure that when the rains come, these pumps should be functional. We've also procured additional pumps on skid-mounted pumps that will help us in dealing with any extra flows. As I mentioned, we've installed a net on the 1 mile outfall, and today we began to basically look at using an ROV to go into the 1 mile pipe and inspect to make sure that there's no debris left in there. We also sent divers down to the inlet structure into the 1 mile, and they did an inspection and cleaned whatever debris was in there, which was very little. So in terms of the education campaign, we still feel the best defense is to basically have what you call it, a source control mechanism in place. So the first thing is for these materials not to get into the sewers in the first place. So we're going to work actively to get the word out that these materials should not be flushed. And so that's, again, an extra measure of ensuring that the amounts that we get in the plant will be minimal and we can definitely safely deal with them. So in terms of, we also have the safe centers that we have where members of the public can go and get rid of their syringes in a legal manner rather than flush them down the drain. So in terms of one of the lessons we learned in this process was we need to have a better notification system in place. So during, as I mentioned, during this event, we had a task force. The task force worked on this issue. And so if this ever arises again, the task force will be, we can always bring that task force back. But hopefully, we never get to a situation where we do. And we're working definitely to make sure we don't get to that situation. So in terms of the notification, the top basically talks about the current notification process that we have in place, from EPA to CD11 to Office of Emergency Services and all that. But the motion requires us to expand that notification process, and that we've put in place. So if there's a future incident, we're definitely going to notify beyond the normal people that we tend to notify. So in concluding, we believe the 2005 sewage overflow was what caused this, and that the 6 weeks of flow that we've had through this pipe now has cleaned everything. We're going to go back in there and verify, and this last 1 mile, we've pretty much verified the last portion, but the 1 mile is what's left. And we've basically implemented all these preventive measures, and they're basically multiple layers of redundancy. So we put in multiple lines of defense. So if anything passes through one, the next one should get it. So we're quite confident that this is a one-time event, and this will not be repeated again. So thank you for your time.
Very good. Why don't we hear from the representative from Council District 11, colleagues, before we go to questions?
Thank you very much, council members. Good afternoon. My name is David Graham-Casso. I am Councilmember Bonin's Communications Director and Environmental Policy Advisor. Thank you very much for hearing this motion today. As you are now obviously aware, on September 23rd, materials of sewage origin, such as tampon casings, condoms, and syringes, began to wash ashore beaches in Santa Monica Bay. As Councilmember Bonin has said repeatedly, this was a disgusting and unfortunate event. Councilmember Bonin authored the motion before you today for a few reasons. First of all, with El Nino on its way, it is absolutely imperative that the staff at Hyperion know exactly how this spill happened so that they can ensure it does not happen again when the El Nino rains start. As you've heard today, measures and redundancies are being put in place to accomplish this. Secondly, also, as you have heard, Councilmember Bonin's motion asks for sanitation to work with stakeholders to improve the public notification if any future similar events were to occur. It's absolutely inexcusable that anyone might potentially find out about syringes on the beach by stepping on one. We found out about this through calls directly to the council member and social media posts. We can do a much better job of notifying the community so that beachgoers are aware before they get to the beach that this is happening. That should be done, and we're thankful that sanitation is looking at partnering with groups like Heal the Bay and local council offices and other local agencies who have extensive networks in the not only constituents near the beach, but those who frequent our beaches around the bay. Finally, it's Councilmember Bonin's sincere hope that we will use this disgusting and unfortunate situation as not only a learning experience and teachable moment, but also as an opportunity to improve how we operate as a city. Materials of sewage origin would never reach the beach if we didn't need to pump so much wastewater into the bay in the first place. There are hundreds of thousands of gallons of water being discharged into the bay every single day. This is water that could and should be recycled and reused to a much greater extent. Not only would this help improve and protect the water quality in the bay, but recycling water would go a very, very long way to alleviating our drought. Councilmember Bonin would like to ensure that in addition to this report, the dedicated creative engineers and staff at the Bureau of Sanitation are identifying what roadblocks exist to recycling more water so that the council as policymakers can help remove those roadblocks and that we can recycle more water and protect the bay. Thank you again for your consideration of this motion.
Very good. Colleagues, any questions? Mr. Blumenfield.
So, thank you very much for the presentation. The stuff, the leak was, the effluent was started in 2005. So for 10 years it was sort of sitting there but not being sent out. Was some of it potentially put in the ocean over the last 10 years that we just don't know about?
Yeah, in essence, what we're saying is because it came through the not storm drain system, and the way it's designed in the plant is we capture all that flow and send it back. So this was flow that went beyond that. So in essence, that portion of the pipe stayed largely dry because we were capturing all the flow before it and sending it back.
But
So-
potentially any rainstorm over the last 10 years may have sent a good portion of this stuff out to the ocean and then back to the beach, and we just didn't.
So when we looked at, we kind of looked at that with our expert panel in terms of travel distance of material. And so from where we found a lot of this material when we did the inspection, we believe some of it traveled along the way with each subsequent rainstorm, but not enough to get out. And so that's because it has to travel through quite a distance in the plant and then also 1 mile out. So you have to have enough flow and velocity to have it move that far. So on the 15th, we had a combination of both rain and using the outfall. So under normal circumstances, we believe that this is the first major flush of material out because it had not traveled that far, and we were capturing the water upstream of that and sending it back, so only rain could move it, but not enough to move it out, the outfall.
So it's the combination of the outflow and the rain, because I'm sure we've had much bigger rainstorms over these last 10 years than we had in September.
Yeah, but this was a combination of both rain and using the outfall at the same time, which doesn't occur. Because on that day, on the 15th, we were actually going to test the valves. But because the rains were coming, we shut that off because we've not been in a situation to use the outfall and rain at the same time. So we shut the valve off. But then when that valve, we did not do the test. So, but when that valve malfunctioned on that day, we ended up using this outfall in the same time while it was raining.
And in terms of how much of this effluent or whatever you want to, MOSO, is that the word? MOSO, did we capture on the beach versus how much do we think was lost into the ocean somewhere?
Most of the material we believe has washed ashore. By our counts, we've collected over 5,000 casings. The currents could possibly be pulling some residuals in. We're still doing beach cleanups over the last, I think it's been about 2 months now. When you look at our graphs of data collected, it's asymptotically reduced to nearly zero.
So there's no real way to know.
There's no real way to know.
If it was the currents took it out to sea, and it may just be.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you're talking about using a remote inspection for the outflow to see if there's more residue. What is that remote inspection? Is that like a drone kind of thing?
In sense, we're going to send a remote operated vehicle with cameras and sonar to go through this dark pipe that's 1 mile long and try to, see whatever we can see through the camera, and with the sonar waves that is recorded, the company is going to be able to tell us whether they feel there's material there or not. But it's our belief that having used this pipe for 6 straight weeks, that all that material is washed out. But in case it's not, then this is the verification process to once and for all verify that it is clean, and if it's not, then we take measures to clean it.
Should we be doing this with other pipes as well, using this? I mean, it sounds like a great technology to be able to check those pipes. Is there more pipes that we should be doing besides this one?
No, because we only have 2 outfalls outside the plant. So we have the 5 and the 1. And the 5, in essence, carries our wastewater treated effluent, which we have a mechanism for removing the muscle, and we've added a 4th line of defense. So we are quite confident that this material will not go through the screens, and all of that will be captured. So now we want to be able to be confident that if and when we use the 1 mile outfall, that it is clean. So we do not get in a situation where we put clean water in a dirty pipe, which was what the situation we face in this instance.
Just also another note that we do in our in-plant within Hyperion, our storm drain system, we have inspected those storm drain pipes and done cleaning of those.
Yeah.
Those also.
Great. And you're saying the chance of this happening again is very unlikely?
Yes.
That's just because of the unique circumstances?
Yeah, where you had a sewer overflow, come through an air pipe, come out inside the plant, overflowed into a storm drain. And so that situation and the pump plant that was impacted no longer exists. So we're quite confident that this should not happen again.
And lastly, and I'll let others take it, I like the What Not to Flush campaign, and would love to get my office, I'm sure other offices involved in that as for part of the outreach. So please
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
keep us engaged in that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation and your response since this disaster. Question, the toxic materials that were held in this tank, for lack of a better description, for 10 years, what's the process for once you know these hazardous materials are being held, how often do you go back and incinerate or dispose of, and how do you do that? Right, so from 2005, all these toxic materials were held, and then in this event, they got flushed out. What's the process for, how did that happen? I mean, how was that overlooked? You don't just keep these toxic materials sitting there for years and years and years, right? You inspect and you remove them and dispose of them or incinerate them or whatever?
So back in 2005, when this occurred, we did clean up and we reported it to the regional board with the expectation that all that flow had gone out.
But it hadn't. Is
It
that correct?
hadn't, yes.
Okay, I want to make sure I understood that.
So it had not. So it was sitting basically in the storm drain pipes, quite dormant right there.
And your response now has been to mitigate that from happening again by this.
Exactly, putting the screens and then sending cameras out there, videotaping the pipe, and cleaning what's inside the pipe.
And you've inspected all systems related to Hyperion?
Yes.
Okay. And then in terms of the 3/8-inch screen, would that capture all hypodermic needles and most of the, say the worst scenario happened again? Are you confident that this 3/8-inch screen would capture most of those hazardous materials as like a last stopgap
Yes,
measure?
because most of the materials we saw was just not like a single needle. It was the needle plus the attached plastics to them. So we are quite confident that this should capture. But the first line is to ensure that it doesn't even get into the storm drain system.
Right.
And so that's the regime that we have in place to not also have this, but catch basins within the plant, routine inspections, clean, all that, because this is unnatural to the storm drain and it shouldn't be there.
And is this monitoring system in place indefinitely?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on the question about the screen, people should know better, but diabetics do testing with some very narrow needles. Could those not flow through the screen?
But we have
They're only about this wide.
Tim, why don't you put back the slide so people can understand that what happened here is the stuff flowed outside of the Hyperion system and into the storm drain, which is why it got out. There's no way that will happen again.
So this, thank you, Councilman. So this more so is unnatural to the storm drain system. It just doesn't, it's not there. So it comes through the treatment process. So there's a recognition that people do flush this even though they should not. And so we have the treatment process which takes care of that, which is the skimming, because they float, and we skim them off. And we have not only the bar screens at the beginning, but 2 sets of skimming mechanisms inside the plant to skim them off. So we do that. We just added this next screen again as a last extra line. But we are quite confident that the treatment system works, and as long as we keep materials from entering into the storm drain, which we are going to do, and getting out of the storm drain, this should not happen again.
Right, as long as that's a last sort of emergency line of defense, you would hope it would be narrow enough to catch everything that got through the other time.
Yeah, and we explored the idea of making it much smaller, but then if you make it much smaller, hydraulically the flow has to go through. And so we're trying to have a measure where we capture material but don't end up flooding the plant itself, because if this flow doesn't come through the screen, then it's going to back up and flood within the plant itself. So that's the balance we...
So you might let through a few diabetic testing needles, but you'd catch everything else in that.
Yeah, but back to the skimming takes care of all that.
Right, it's just.
Yeah. And so we're hoping, the fact that we're going to also embark on this program of public outreach we believe the result will be that we will get less of these materials coming in the first place. And then the ones that do come in, our skimmers will remove them.
And if we outreach to any of the big drug manufacturers to help do a PSA or do something in this regard on the proper disposal of hypodermic needles, et cetera?
That's something that we haven't done and we will do. But the way the health and safety code is right now, for the diabetics, they get materials, containers to be able to take this back to legally safe places. And so we have the safe centers that we're going to publicize that are all over the city where they can drop off the material and as a means of basically having safe disposal of the sharps and the needles. Yeah.
And this all happened out of the 1 mile pipe, right?
Yes.
Do we have any idea if this kind of stuff ever came out of the 5 mile pipe? Because it's far enough off site that it probably wouldn't flow onto the beaches necessarily. But we ideally wouldn't want it 5 miles out there in the bay either.
And the answer is this is not representative of the treatment system that we have. Our treatment process takes all this stuff out. So you would not see it in a 5 mile going out.
So there's no way you could have that kind of
No,
accident.
and you wouldn't have seen it in a 1 mile either, if not for the fact that it came out, raw sewage got into a storm drain line.
Okay, very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Very good. There are a couple of speaker cards on this. Let's have Rita Camp-Paulith come on up. Thank you, Tracy and Tim. Thank you. Go ahead, Rita.
Council members, my name is Rita Camploth, and I'm the Science and Policy Director at Heal the Bay. We appreciate the opportunity to speak on this issue. As you know, Heal the Bay has been closely tracking the investigation around this release. And, we believe that it's critical that we understand both the causes of the release and get assurance that they have been addressed, as you all know, with the predicted heavy rains. We really do appreciate the efforts of the city to maintain open lines of communication and keep us in the loop. But we did have some remaining questions after this report was released, so I'd just like to discuss those briefly here. First and foremost, we question whether it's realistic to expect that nearly 5,000 tampon casings were contained in the volume of raw sewage that was reported as discharged in 2005, again, around 160,000 gallons. Just to put that in context briefly, assuming that toilet flushes were about a quarter of the volume, which is a pretty conservative assumption, and that all those toilets were low flow, again, pretty conservative, that would mean that about 20% of the toilet flushes had to have contained a tampon applicator for that amount of applicators to come through. Also consider that volume represents less than a minute of flow. Sorry, may I continue for just a minute?
Just if you could finish your thought.
Sure. So clearly there's a disconnect that needs to be explained. So our question is really, were these materials accumulating over time for some reason? And if so, why and what's being done about it? Also, there was another planned diversion back in 2006. So we're questioning if those items had actually accumulated in 2005, why they weren't flushed out during that event. So again, in closing, we appreciate the attention that's been on this issue, and we just urge the council and the city to ensure that these questions are answered.
Great. Thank you very much. John Walsh and Wayne.
John Walsh, blogging at HollywoodHighlands.org or J. Walsh Confidential, tweeting at Hollywood Dems. The subject here is caca, a caca catastrophe. But I want to tell you that I had a big speech for a 1-minute speech, but I'm scared shitless because Al-Qaeda struck at San Bernardino and killed 14 people about an hour and a half ago.
If you could stay on the topic that's
the topic is my safety. And I am not safe in this building because if you go downstairs, you'll see 40 or 50 cops surrounding this
Mr.
building.
Walsh, you're out
of here.
Goodbye.
And if you want to stay here,
go ahead, Wayne.
Al-Qaeda shows up, you get shot, not me.
Wayne?
They're attacking. Al-Qaeda has
Yes, this is interesting to talk about the shit screens and the shit nets, which is good because I looked at the diagrams. But what you need is you need an audible warning on the beach, and it needs to be in English and Spanish, similar to the Al-Qaeda warning systems and the bombing systems that you used to have. So on the beach, it should go, warning, shit on the beach, shit on the beach, sarote en playa, sarote en playa. Now, if you had a warning system like that, all the people would get off the beach. You would notice it, you would recognize it, it would be bilingual, it would cost very little money, and nobody would be stepping on all of these drug needles. So it is a caca catastrophe. And I'm glad, and I think you should open up another session to talk about the tampons too, and because we don't want the wildlife eating tampons, especially dolphins.
Very good. Mr. Koretz, you'd like to talk some more on this item?
Yeah, I just had one question for sanitation. If they've looked into connecting Hyperion with the proposed MWD recycled water plant, which hopefully could, if we could dish some of it off through that system, have less flowing wasted into the bay.
So, Mr. Koretz, the item today is about the spill. If we could just very briefly answer, because now we're getting off topic here.
Well, definitely, Councilman Koretz, that is something that we would like to look into. We are embarking upon, and in fact, we had been doing some strategic regional use planning for Hyperion as this whole event came about, and our attention obviously has been diverted to dealing with this issue at hand. But we will be getting back on that strategic planning, and that is something that we want to do to increase recycled water at Hyperion.
Thank you, Tracy. All right, let's go ahead and, hearing and seeing no objection, we will go ahead and note and file the report, and as much as it was submitted for informational purposes only, and authorize the Bureau of Sanitation to address any regulatory action mutual benefit element issued by the state and report back to the council on its progress. Item number 2, Mr. Prieto.
Certainly, item number 2. Bureau of Sanitation report in response to motion Martinez-Krikorian relative to developing, with the assistance of the Sun Valley Working Group, a certification program for the exclusive waste hauling franchise system. You have Karen Coca from the Bureau of Sanitation.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Fuentes, members of the committee. My name is Karen Coca. I'm with the Bureau of Sanitation. A motion was introduced, Martinez-Krikorian motion, directing the Bureau of Sanitation to engage the Sun Valley Working Group to gather their input on the proposed certification program that is one of the main features of our franchise program that we're moving into for solid waste. Also, we were directed to come back with a report summarizing the comments from the working group, as well as indicating what of their comments were going to be incorporated into the certification program. So in August of last year, I met with the Sun Valley Working Group. We also exchanged a number of emails, a couple of phone calls to gather their input on and their opinions on the solid waste facilities that would be used as part of our solid waste franchise program that's scheduled to begin in 2017. They had a lot to say. They have a lot of experience with solid waste facilities in that area, and they had a number of comments. And to summarize, there were a number of concerns about how the facilities operate, that the entitlement process seems to have a disconnect from the actual operation of the facilities and following the terms and conditions of the permits that they have. Some of the issues include having a fully enclosed facility, but the doors are always open and they're handling material outside. So you have odor problems, litter problems, excessive truck traffic on the streets, a lot of damage to the roads. Then they, as far as community concerns, they felt that there were a number of items that we could include in our certification program that might help bridge that gap. One of them is that they feel all facilities need to be fully enclosed, have negative air handling to deal with odors, that they should have what we call roll-up doors, basically, so that there are no openings to the facility when there's material inside, that all the material needs to be handled and stored inside, that the city should be able to inspect at any time to make sure that they actually are following their permit conditions. Facilities should have scales. We should be monitoring their activities, the tonnage going in and out, what's happening to it. They felt that there should be limitations on operating hours, again, because of some of the impacts that they've experienced. And that the community always get involved, the community around any newer proposed facilities be extensively consulted to make sure that these measures are going into place. Also, they asked that, well, in particular for Sun Valley, that any new facilities be located at least 15 miles from any existing large solid waste facilities. There were many more comments. That was the major comments that they had, and it really had to do with the operation. I also had several meetings with the local enforcement agency that enforces the permits, the state permits for solid waste facilities. I met with the planning department, who holds conditional use permits for several of the solid waste facilities within the city, just to get their input and to see where we can help bridge the gap and make sure that basically that these facilities are good neighbors, because that's a lot of the concern. It has to do with the operation and these facilities being good neighbors. So as a result of my meetings and my investigations, we actually we sent out at the time, I'm sorry, let me go back. At the time, the request for proposals was already out. So the companies that proposed on the franchise were formulating their responses. But after the series of meetings, we sent out an addendum to the RFP. We included a couple pages of specific requirements for the facilities that will be accepting material from the franchise haulers to make sure that they are well aware of what needs to happen at the facilities that they'll take material to. And many major requirements actually we included, including requiring that every facility that accepts any material from our franchise haulers have and maintain a solid waste facilities permit. There are some loopholes, let's say, for some facilities not to have a permit, but all certified facilities have to have and maintain that permit. We require that all facilities that handle organics, source separated, or solid waste have to handle it within a fully enclosed building. That will mitigate a lot of the problems. They have to have odor control measures. They have to have litter control measures in sight. Let's see, they obviously have to be in compliance with all of their requirements. There are some limitations to our certification program. By law, we can't enforce other regulations from other entities. But the way that the certification program for the 50 to 70 facilities that will be accepting our waste will be implemented, we will be on site at these facilities very frequently. And I think that one of the things that we can help with is to be the eyes and ears for other regulatory agencies who generally don't have enough staff to be on site on a regular basis. So we can be the eyes and ears, we can work with the operators and make sure they maintain their certification and their compliance, and make sure that they handle our material in the most safe and efficient manner. So The next steps for this report is we recommend that you receive and file. The next steps for the certification program itself will be to go to the Board of Public Works with the administrative rules for the program and get that adopted, we expect in first quarter next year. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Very good. Well, clearly, this process has gotten better because of the stakeholder process. The only question that I've got is understanding that these agreements are for a significant amount of time, 5 or 10 years, I think, et cetera. If there is a compliance issue, what ability do we have, understanding that the contract runs as long as they do, what ability will we have to resolve some of the compliance issues if there are any?
Well, the first is the term of the contracts. They will be 10 years with 2 5-year renewals. So they are long-term contracts. We do expect that there will be infrastructure development as well as upgrades to existing facilities to meet our certification requirements. What we will have for all the material that's collected is primary facilities and backup facilities. Because at times you do have to use a contingency facility to take your material, but all of those facilities have to maintain their certification with us. And in our staffing plan and in our, we're now building a team, we'll actually have 8 to 10 staff that will do nothing but monitor these facilities and make sure that they remain certified. So we'll work with them and the regulatory agencies to maintain their compliance, but if there are problems, there will be backup and contingency facilities that they'll be able to use that are certified.
So because there is a lot of history, in particular in Sun Valley, with some of the operations out there, and they've gotten markedly better, but there's a long history with sort of compliance issues. So what you're saying is that if there are compliance issues, there are contingent contractors with which you will work with and then disengage with the folks who have fallen out of the certification?
Yes, I mean, the contracted haulers have facilities that they either own or contract with. They are going to also have backup facilities that they can use that will also be certified.
Okay, very good. Colleagues? Mr. Blumenfield?
But so they could potentially own both facilities, the main one and the backup one?
Certainly.
Yeah, so if there's a compliance issue that's not about the facility but about the contractor, then that's great.
That is a different process. The certification process is specifically for the facilities. Our contractors, the ones who actually, will go out and collect the material and educate the customers and take care of all of that, we're going to be monitoring their activities very, very closely.
The certification that we're doing now with the new program, is it any different than the way that we certify current city facilities, or is it just making...
It is markedly different than our current program. Currently, we have a certification program. It's voluntary, number one, so that's different. Also, what we certify for is the ability to use under our C&D requirements, which require a certain diversion rate at the facility. We do not inspect or certify for other permit requirements, make sure that they have health and safety plans, make sure that their operations are run a certain way. This will be a much more robust program than what we have right now.
Robust in terms of enforcing, but in terms of what you're enforcing, it's also a whole different set of items.
Yes. I mean, as far as we can go, we will work with, as I said, the regulatory agencies. For example, Cal OSHA. We can certainly take a look at whether they're complying with the Cal OSHA requirements, and we'll work with Cal OSHA if they're not. We do not go to that extent right now. The certification processes right now is much more limited.
And I know that the public comment, there was a lot of different comments. Were they all from the Sun Valley Group, or were there a number of other major stakeholders?
It was from the Sun Valley Working Group.
Are there other stakeholders that are participating and adding comment?
Well, I would say that there was quite a bit of discussion at council and in committee about the certification program. A lot of input from the council members at the time. Also, a lot of at several meetings at the Board of Public Works where we spent several hours with stakeholders giving their opinions about how this process should work.
But at this point, it's limited to this
for
process
for
here.
this report.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, and last thing, what's the timeline overall on getting the whole system put together?
Well, as I mentioned, first quarter of next year is when we expect to go to the Board of Public Works for the certification program. We expect, and our master timeline will be to go to Board of Public Works before mid-year next year with the contracts. So they go to Board of Public Works and then Mayor and Council. So next year.
Very good. We've got a couple of speaker cards here. Thank you very much. Mike O'Gara, Bill Ike, Wayne, and John Welsh, who I think has fled the building.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike O'Gara. I'm part of the Sun Valley Working Group. We've got an awful lot of experience in Sun Valley, as most of you know. Some of the things that were left out, or one of my remarks on the document you have, was that the facility has to be a limit of a minimum of 5 acres. 5 acres won't cut it. We have a facility that's 4.1 acres in Sun Valley right now, and it's not big enough to handle the flow of traffic in and out of the facility, and the building is built too small to allow the trash trucks to back up in there. And they dump their trash right on the ground. If you want, I have photographs. That facility is coming up for an expansion of their stuff, and we'll see you at that expansion thing. But the things we did not touch was how many trucks you can park on the facility, how high can the bales be of recycled material sitting there, how big can a pile of metal be that you're going to recycle someday, and how long can it sit there. All of those things tend to create a hazard on the lot for people, the trucks coming in and out, and for working conditions. I have pictures of bales that are teetering and everything else. So those things need to be looked at. We didn't get to them. But the most important thing is everything has to be in an enclosed building, and this facility says enclosed is 3 walls and a roof. It's not.
Got it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Bill Ike. I'm with the Shadow Hills Property Owners Association. This is the most important thing you're going to be doing for the city of Los Angeles. This is really important. This is trash. You're picking up trash throughout the city and you're putting it someplace else. The important thing that was missed in the presentation was, what about the trucks that are bringing this stuff? There's no, this is all about the facilities, but you're franchising the trucks. The trucks need to be LNG. You do not want the diesel, all the old diesel trucks showing up in the city of Los Angeles polluting all of the area. Where's that? Where are those regulations? Number 2, the things that you don't know or you weren't discussed was, they talked about only enclosing for organic material or for something else, but not material recovery facilities. You need to have it enclosed for material recovery facilities. Look at your own facility. That's exactly what it should.
You can finish.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's exactly what it should be. I've written extensive letters, and you're right. These are the comments only from the Sun Valley area, but it was because we'd spent probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 months talking about community recycling, and it just was, which I view was an open sewer. Now, some of you people may have gone there, maybe you haven't, but this is the most important thing that you're going to do. It's really important.
Great, thanks, Bill. Wayne?
Such a wonderful area, that north part, Sunland, Tahunga, and Sun Valley, and it just gets dumped on all the time. And you talk about wanting outreach. A lot of these speakers, they come from far away, and you only give them 1 minute to talk about this stuff. It's outrageous. There's a lot of going on here. Isolating an exclusive waste hauling and recycling franchise system, well, that's a monopoly. Monopoly is a game that children play. It should not be implemented in a real-world system in 2015. You should have choices in who you hire for your franchise, for your commercial and multifamily hauling, to ensure you get the best price. One game you love to play is taking our trash and dumping it up to our neighbors in Kern County. So now you're trying to get out of a lawsuit because Kern County is just suing the shit out of you, and you want to now dump the crap back in Sun Valley. Shame on you people.
Very good. We'll go ahead and note and file that. Takes us to item number 3.
Item number 3. Department of Water and Power report in response to motion Fuentes Bloomfield relative to the status of the Enterprise Empowerment Zone Rate Program. Mr. Chair, this matter was continued from your September 16th meeting. I have staff from Department of Water and Power and Economic.
Sure.
Sorry.
Very good. Let's make some room for the ratepayer. Dr. Pickle, come and join us too if there's room. I think there might be. Yeah. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All righty. Who wants to go first? Neil?
Actually, I'm going to have Keisha.
Okay, Keisha.
Sure.
Good afternoon.
Sorry,
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Keisha Washington. I'm the Director of Economic Development at the Department of Water and Power. What you have before you is our answer in response to what we can do with the demise of CRA and our opportunities to be able to provide incentives for new load into our service territory. What we have proposed is a business promotion bill credit program. And what we have done is talking with our partners at Economic and Workforce Development Department, as well as working with our legal team and the ratepayer advocate, tried to figure out a seamless process by which we can do the intake of the potential customers, and also to let them know about other incentives that may be available on the city side. And I believe it's approximately page 3 of the response, and we have a flow chart there that basically explains that my group and or the rates group will do an intake. When we have a new customer, and we'll also look at aggressively marketing towards new customers in some areas, but also when we have the new customer, take them through the application process. It'll be paper-based initially until we're able to have a computer-based process. We'll have that approved, and then we'll jointly work with EWDD to craft a letter of response to them saying you have been approved, if that is the case, for the bill credit, and it's a declining bill credit, and if there are other incentives available throughout the city, which EWDD will list for us. I think there is hope in the future there may be some geographic ones that are available, but right now I think we're the only game in town. And with that, I'll turn over to Joe in case there's something I'm missing.
We're here to support DWP in these efforts. You know, when we lost the state enterprise zone, we lost a major component of business incentives, the majority of which were offered through the state, but we marketed it. So while LADWP is taking the lead on this, it's my hope and certainly our efforts from our department to maybe look at other departments and how they can participate as well in these incentives.
Neil, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I mean, I think we've had a lot of involvement on the rate side looking at this. I've had very capable staff that have been involved, and our legal team has been assisting us for some time. So we think this is a good proposal. Again, the credit amounts are something that we have based on our excess generation. We've looked at roughly 80 megawatts, and we've looked at this in the case of going forward roughly 10 years. It's based on the IRP, so we're linking all these things together. We think this is great in terms of job creation. We think it's good in terms of all of our customer base. To the extent we can draw new businesses in, that additional load, especially when you're looking at excess generation, it's much more cost effective for all of our ratepayers. Right. So we think this is a win-win essentially.
Great. Before I move on to Dr. Pickle, help me understand how you all landed on the 80 megawatts. I mean, I have to imagine there's some math here, and obviously some math involved here in terms of what is justifiable in excess capacity. And colleagues, I want to thank you for being patient on this one because we heard it before, as Mr. Prieto mentioned, and we're hearing it again. But the idea here is to really capitalize on the asset that the utility has, and that's, as a result of mandates, we're going to have more generation that I think the worst possible situation would be we have to curtail in some respect. And so rather than deal with it that way, if we have it, we should go ahead and share that benefit with prospective businesses who could benefit from that. And understanding that we've done away with a lot of the incentives, this was an idea that I can't say was born out of my office necessarily, but it's an idea to try to figure out how to maximize the generation that the utility is going to sort of go through. And I think now as we move towards a 50% RPS, there's going to be, again, situations where we have tremendous capacity and the ability to pass on those savings and help the rate base and steer clear of any legal issues with Prop 26. So I think this is really, really very exciting to hear it come to fruition. But the question was, 80 megawatts, how is it that we landed on that number at this point?
Actually, you mentioned that under your direction, we went back and double check with our IIP group, the planning, as you mentioned, that we're going to build out a lot of access capacity. So we kind of talk to our engineers, planners, and we say, okay, look forward, all these different projects, we laid it up, for the future. And they tell us, starting from October 2016, we will have, capacity, access capacity, and we start off with 80, and as the time grows, and it will grow, but we say, okay, let's, deliver a number that we can support. Great. So we started with 80. That's actually your idea.
Okay. Well, thank you. Dr. Pickle?
We looked for analogies with existing economic development rates at other utilities in the state. And we recommended that they set a minimum size and also have outside verification of eligibility for the purposes of not just eligibility, but also counting jobs. So our concern was processing it within the city may create some problems. And they've chosen to go ahead with the 100 kilowatt minimum size, but they are planning, at least at this stage, to review eligibility and count performance on the inside.
Very good. Colleagues, questions? Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, trying to understand exactly how it's going to work in terms of, so it's not geographic based, it's the entire city.
Correct.
It's a discount for new businesses, but how do you decide? I mean, at some point, it's a finite amount of excess capacity, right? So if you get more subscribers, does the discount diminish, or do we put a more rigorous screen on who qualifies for it? I mean, how do you when the product becomes scarce, how do you decide to distribute?
First come, first serve. I'm sorry, it's first come, first serve. So it's the 80 megawatts. But remember, the discount is over 3 years. So the first 3, if we cap out at the first 3 years, then we'll see a drop off by year 4, and we'll continue to add. I don't know that we're going to maximize the first year. But that, again, is based on this is the amount of excess capacity we have. The discount, again, is a 3-year process or a 3-year term. So as we add, then we'll continue to look to see how much intake we've had or how much capacity we have available.
I guess it's maybe at the beginning it's not going to be an issue, but at some point, if we're successful in this program, we're going to have an issue of, is it only a small number of new companies are taking up the entire allotment? Should we distribute that more by the most number of companies? Should we have a geographic distribution? First come, first serve doesn't seem like it's a good schoolroom, way to do things, but it doesn't seem like necessarily the most rational way to do it, other than as a way to get started.
What we would suggest, Councilmember, is that to start off with that approach, but then reevaluate, obviously, to the extent we're going to be oversubscribed at some point. Great participation, that would be awesome in terms of job creation, new businesses. That's actually that position I'd love to be in, that having to look at what would be the next approach. We can then reevaluate, come back to you, come back to our board with either looking at reducing the amount of the discount to extend it to a broader group, or what other approach you might take. But I think to get started, we should be fine on the 80. I think we'll just continue to look at that report back. We can look at this on an ongoing basis. And to the extent we start to approach that 80, then we would come back to you with our suggested options.
And how do you decide the level of discount?
You want to do the math?
Yeah, come on, George. I'll let you.
It was math.
It
It was math.
Does that fluctuate too?
No, it's a declining discount. It's 7.6, then 5, and I think 2 or 3. But it was based on math, and I'll let George explain.
Right. It's based on cost of service. We look at our access capacity and if it's idle, and what is the value we can get these idle value out of it. So
what is the what?
we have let's say we have the capacity. We have a generation capacity sitting there, not serving anybody. It's wasted. So let's say if we sell that at a discount rate, we still recover some costs, and then make ourselves whole. So we did a cost of service analysis on these and get the numbers together. It's not that huge number, but it's a decent number that we come up with.
Yeah, I guess. I see all the numbers as interrelated. If you were to increase the discount to 100%, you would have a lot of takers very fast. I'm saying you're down to 7.6%.
Okay.
So whatever percentage you do is going to directly impact how fast
Well,
it's used.
We think 80 megawatts is a pretty good size to start off. And just for example, 80 megawatts is equivalent to a size of a UCLA school total. We say, oh, if I have a new UCLA school here, it's a huge load added. And our peak is 6,000 megawatts. We hit it. But 80 megawatts, that's kind of a good size, compared to that 6,000. So we say overall, 80 megawatts will be a pretty good number. And I don't think that the first 3 years we will have problems, have oversubscription there. So that's how we kind of look at, okay, 80, we can start from there. And then if we can expand it later on, that's good thing. Like you mentioned, it's more, business come to LA. We'd like to see that. And our growth is pretty flat right now. If we can have these kind of growth, it's less than 10% growth, but it's a lot for us.
And when is the application going to be done, the process?
The application process will be, it'll be a paper-based one initially, and because the intent is to have this as part of the rate case, it would be actually ready beginning October, whenever the rates are adopted and implemented. So it'll be paper-based initially. We'll be going out and actually working between our partners at EWD, LAEDC, and others who actually work to attract new businesses to the area. We'll be able to do that. We will also advertise it on our Locate LA website and some of the other opportunities to be able to share that. In the future, we'd like to be able to look at perhaps targeting areas of the city where there hasn't been or there's a lot of vacancies to encourage job creation there. Again, it's open to the whole city, but if we can help out in some areas, we'd like to be able to do that. We'd love to have a computer-based one. That's a little bit further out given some of the other constraints that our IT folks have.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, Mr. Fuentes and Mr. Blumenfield, and thank you. I think it's a wonderful program. Question, can you give a general account of dollars and cents here in terms of what would the 7.6% credit amount translate to based on the average user? So how much, in other words, how much real dollars, even if it's an anecdotal one, are we looking at in terms of savings as an incentive? Because when we talk about percentages, it's a little bit abstract. But if you can give some examples of here's how much money you can save by...
So it's a little in excess of about $15 million on the 80.
But that's for the whole program. But how about like per user?
If we had 100 kW user.
I don't expect the exact numbers, but
the challenges we have.
I'm sure those
a large
calculations...
distribution when in terms of our commercial customer sizes and their consumption. That like when we've had to look at the rates, the proposed rate action, we looked at different kinds of customer classes. So whether it was a warehouse, for example, a large refrigeration facility, light manufacturing. So we could look at that and come up with some numbers.
Here's why I ask. If I'm a business owner, I'm going to look at this and say, okay, what does this mean?
Right.
But if I say, here is the scale of my business, here is my, this is my use.
Your usage, yeah.
If I take advantage of this program, I will be credited,
Right.
$1,200 per month. That's going to mean something real to most businesses. And I think that would be very helpful in terms of selling this.
I agree, and that's something that we can include as part of the advertisement, saying, for example, if your usage is 100 kW, this is what this would look like, with all the caveats. The other thing I want to be very clear in terms of what we're doing and why we're doing the applications in my group as opposed to EWDD, is I want to make sure these customers take advantage of all of the programs that we have at DWP, all of the energy efficiency, the water conservation, solar, and everything else. So that application gives us the opportunity to do all of that up front.
That's a great selling point. If you can talk about, here's the dollars and cents that you can potentially save based on the various programs, including this one,
Right.
I think that would be a real successful campaign.
Councilman, with the minimum, that 100 kilowatts, you're looking at savings of roughly $500 a month.
Significant for any small business
it's meaningful.
Owner or medium size. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
So, what's exciting, Mr. Farrell, I think you're spot on, is the DWP bundle opportunity here that we can offer. And the utility users tax is, how much is it these days? It's 12 or 10%? 12%. So, one way, I know it's still anecdotal, but, if you, on your first year, you're not paying 12% on your bill. Now you're paying just under 5%. That's actually, it's something. And it's not a tax credit. It's a rider. Right?
Correct.
Right, and so we have to be careful how we sort of speak about it once we formalize the application process. But, Keisha, I'm glad that you mentioned sort of the outreach. I think that's going to be very, very significant in how it is that we communicate the outreach. I would hate for this to go the way of the feed-in tariff, where, we set out this expectation and we have a program that is not working at all. In fact, I think there's things that are coming from the board here asking potentially for us to consider extending dates. It's a program that's underperforming, and it has a significant sort of carrot for developers, and it's still not working. This is a little bit more modest, but I think it's just as meaningful for new business to come to Los Angeles. So I'm very excited. If there's no additional comments or questions, we'll take the one speaker card on this, the two speaker cards, John Walsh and Wayne from Encino.
John Walsh is in protective custody right now. So, here we go again. You're talking about outreach. It's because the DWP lies. That's why you had bad outreach. You were at one of the outreach meetings. I saw you there. To your credit, Flint, you were the only councilman that went to any of the outreach meetings. None of the other councilmen even bothered to show up to them. And it was a disaster. And this 12% utility tax is a disaster on small businesses, and the 7 charges on a small business A1A structure, a small business gets charged almost $48 before they turn on the light switch. That's what you need to reform. You need to reform the minimum charge on existing small businesses because it is bankrupting the little guys. If you could cut it down 20%, you would imagine immediately the difference in retaining small businesses, which is what you really have to focus on.
All right, colleagues, so we'll go ahead and note and file the report and request that the Utility and the Economic Workforce Development Department report back on the finalized application and business outreach strategy prior to the October 2016 anticipated program launch. Hearing and seeing no objection, that will be the order. Let's go ahead and reconsider item number 2. Mr. Blumenfield, you were out of the room. There's no objection. That passes. Let's go ahead and reconsider item number 2 now that we've got a quorum and there's no objection, and that now passes. Madam Clerk, are we okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Mr. Brito, any additional business?
No, that clears the desk.
There is
no.
one general public comment card, and that is Wayne.
So yesterday, the DWP board unanimously approved a $265 million transfer of money from our ratepayers to the city council without an earmark or specification of what that money is to go to. And it's really nice. We have the ratepayer advocate that does not justify where you're getting an 8% profit, which equates to $265 million. Supposedly, the DWP is awash in money, and yet they're going to propose a rate hike, and the rate hike is going to be based on the need for maintenance at a $1.1 billion maintenance deficit. So if you were to figure the books correctly of the DWP, you wouldn't have an 8% rate of return. You would have a net loss, resulting in no transfer to the city. The math is fraudulent, the transfer is fraudulent, and it violates Proposition 218.
Very good, colleagues. We are adjourned. Sir?